I do believe that they were informed, and I do believe they were probably told some pretty specific details in the hours immediately before the attack. I don't believe that Israel would have advised the U.S. weeks in advance of the day, time, and strategy. I think they would have said, hey, we're going to launch an attack against the nuclear facilities. We're going to use Mossad. We're going to attack and try to assassinate, political and nuclear power brokers in Iran within the borders of Iran. We are going to do this, and the United States probably had a chance to say, "Hey, we would like that you reconsider this. We would like that if you launch this attack, you launch it in July or August." Like there's all of that kind of negotiation most likely happened. But at the end of the day, I do not believe Donald Trump knew in detail 48 hours before Israel launched their attack. I think Donald Trump probably would have found out the details 4 hours or 6 hours before Israel launched the attack. And part of that is because Israel's trying to compartmentalize the opportunity for a leak because they don't know whether or not somebody in the United States could leak the information to Israel or leak the information to Iran. Keep in mind that about a year ago, that's exactly what happened. A year ago, Israel was sharing information with the United States, and then an NSA person at the United States leaked the information worldwide. So there's a precedent now for Israel to not share all of its details with the United States.
That's crazy. That's true. I remember I think they were just sentenced to 3 years in jail yesterday, the day before you saw that. But that's crazy. I completely forgot about that. That was the plan. Was that plans for an Israeli response to an Iranian attack that was leaked to some media organizations? I can't remember what it was. What does that say about U.S. intelligence? That's pretty surprising.
And I think this is what when you talk about the elephant in the room, Mario, you have to be talking about the decline of American reliability and American influence worldwide. And I think that's what Donald Trump is really struggling with right now, is he's trying to find a way to rebuild that counterbalance of influence that the United States used to have, because the United States has been riddled with spies from China and Russia in our CIA and our military and our army and our navy. We've been absolutely riddled with fundamentalists, with ISIS and other extremists being built right here at home, here in the United States. So, the security and the protection of the United States is in question. And now you're starting to see that there's sympathizers within our own intelligence infrastructure that are trying to involve themselves in the conflict in Israel and the conflict in Ukraine and the conflict in Taiwan. It's a bad look for a country that's supposed to look like it's the premier professional intelligence organization of the world.
Yeah, I agree. And also the fact that the US did not have the ability to authorize such an attack by Israel would say a lot about the US position in the world, the US hegemony as well. It's more and more things that are starting to indicate that we do live in a multipolar world, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I don't know how that will materialize because we really haven't lived through a multipolar world for such a long time. And there's advantages and disadvantages to hegemony. But I think you'd agree with that statement that the US influence in the world and the Middle East, has it, actually, I'm going to challenge it, has it diminished? Because you've also got a major enemy of the US that's been significantly weakened, a strong ally to US to China and Russia. So maybe there's another way of looking at this, is that this could be a US success story, that hey, we've managed to take out, without actually getting involved, we've managed to take out one of our main enemies. Is that a fair argument to make as well?
I would say that it's a fair argument that diminishing Iran benefits the United States. That's a very fair argument. But the United States can't take credit for it. The United States wasn't involved. The United States doesn't have a clear line of accountability to the conflict, to the strategy, to the planning. It's all Israel. And if anything, the public, what's been shared publicly, is that the United States is trying to negotiate with Iran. So if the United States is trying to negotiate with Iran, and then an ally of the United States bombs them before the negotiation can even take place, does that make it look like anybody respects the United States?
And kills the negotiator, Andrew, as well.
Correct. So the United States, if anything, I think Donald Trump is probably pissed because Netanyahu just made Trump look bad, right? In front of the whole world. And that's what I think Putin is also doing the same thing in Ukraine. During Trump's lead up to the election, Netanyahu and Putin were strong supporters of a Donald Trump administration. But once he became the president, Then they started making their own kind of unilateral decisions, understanding that if Trump wants them to cooperate, then they know how to work like Trump works. They know how to make demands that are too big. They know how to negotiate with flex instead of just negotiating with diplomacy. And that's part of the world that we live in, is that we live in a world where people are becoming more aggressive and less diplomatic.
And one could say that they know Trump's position as you know, you learn in poker, you should never share your hand. I'm not a poker player, but that's what I hear. And you've essentially got Trump saying, you know, he's been very vocal since before becoming president. He does not want to start any war. If anything, he wants to end wars. That's a great thing to stand for. But if you make that position very clear, it gives you know, a strong position, a tactical position for allies and rivals or enemies to the US. So you mentioned Putin, obviously Netanyahu. Netanyahu knows the US does not want to get involved, and that gives him the ability to wage a war without worrying about the US. You know, and also he knows Trump wants to, you know, seem like he is Israel's number one ally as president. That's another position that Trump made it clear. So it is possible that Netanyahu is trying to take advantage of these positions that Trump has. So what does that mean? What does that mean for U.S. involvement in the war? Do you think the U.S. could get involved, even if no base is struck? Because obviously Iran's not striking any military installations, American military installations. Could they supply Israel with the GBU-57 bunker buster bombs they need to target or completely destroy the nuclear facilities, especially the Fordow one in Iran? What would be your guess there?
It's a great point, because you have to define what U.S. support means. I would argue Israel already has U.S. support for what's happening in Iran. I can guarantee you Israel has American intelligence. I can guarantee you Israel's using American weapons. I can guarantee you Israelis have received American training in targeting, American training in combat, American training to Mossad. So there's already an incredible amount of American engagement, American involvement already. If what you mean is American military involvement, that's a whole different definition of involvement, right? One of the major differences between Ukraine and Israel is Israel's a thriving economy. So Israel doesn't need the United States to donate them bunker busters. Israel can just buy American-made bunker busters, where Ukraine needed to go out there with like a beggar's pouch and ask for help. Israel doesn't need to do that. Israel can just place an order and buy it, right? And with all the tariffs and everything else going on, Israel's cooperation with the United States is going to reduce its total number of tariffs. So that means it's going to be able to buy more cheaper in a world where nobody else is buying because of the tariffs that are on top of the cost. So that's going to motivate the United States to sell more to Israel at a reduced price. And Donald Trump is trying to fix a failing economy in the United States. So the last thing he's going to do is turn down a buyer of one of America's top exports, which is weapons.
Going back to Hezbollah, again, that was a big surprise to me. It was a surprise, as I said, to the spokesperson, to the ambassador as well. I've asked all of them that question. What's Hezbollah's position? So I also got informed that Hezbollah received an ultimatum from the Lebanese government, supported by France and Saudi, that if they get involved, then the Lebanese government, with the support of the Saudis and France, will directly, I don't know what they say, they'll engage in war, or they'll try to stop Hezbollah from being involved. I'm not sure if that means targeting Hezbollah positions or just dismantling their rocket launchers. Is Hezbollah getting out of the tentacles of Iran? Do you think it's still going to be considered an Iranian proxy? And also, maybe you can also break down, if I'm not sure if there's something you can break down, is how do these proxies work? Is it just like Khamenei, or we don't know who now because many of them have been assassinated, calls, I don't know who on the Hezbollah side because many of them have been assassinated, and says, I need you to do X, Y, Z. Is it as simple as that? Or is it a bit more convoluted because Hezbollah has responsibilities for Lebanon, but also responsibilities for Iran?
So two fantastic questions. To your first point, I want to highlight something that I think you understand, Mario, and most of your audience understands if they're in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is a massive geopolitical player. In the United States and Europe, people don't realize that. They kind of look past Saudi Arabia. Oftentimes, people in Europe and the United States think that Saudi Arabia is like some backwoods country, like old school kingdom, like that they're not modern and they're not powerful. I don't know why, but that's the attitude of many Europeans and many Americans. where when you live in the Middle East, when you're in the Middle East, you understand Saudi Arabia is a massive power broker. They have a massive sphere of influence, and they have incredible diplomatic and military power. So when Israel launched against Iran, I think it understood that the Abraham Accords between Saudi Arabia and Israel were never achieved. They were never finalized, right? Because of the war in Gaza. So there is no formal recognition between Saudi Arabia and Israel. However, when Israel starts to weaken Iran, that's something Saudi Arabia likes, because Saudi Arabia's primary power conflict in the Middle East is Iran. So a weaker Iran is a stronger Saudi Arabia. So now Saudi Arabia has to, on a certain level, be supporting Israel in their conflict against Iran, but not supporting Israel in their conflict against the Palestinians. So this is what I meant earlier when I said that Israel understands it's gaining favor in the region by diminishing Iran. So your point about Hezbollah, I think, is a powerful point, because now Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. What a proxy means is it means that they get a lot of their funding, a lot of their training, a lot of their capability from another nation state. So Hezbollah is a transnational threat that gets its support from Iran. It doesn't mean it's 100% at Iran's direction, but it's largely at Iran's direction, and for sure tied to Iranian support. So if Hezbollah gets involved and Saudi Arabia and Lebanon decide to reduce Hezbollah's influence in Lebanon even more, that's the world seeing Saudi Arabia really executing its leverage in a way that it hasn't seen before. To your point about how do proxies get activated, how do proxies get used, proxy leaders usually know what they want to carry out in terms of objectives. They want to cause conflict, they want to cause disarray, they want to cause an attack, they want to kill people, they want to drive some sort of political ambition. That's what a terrorist group does, is they achieve political goals through fear and death. So what they'll do is they'll oftentimes unilaterally kind of select their targets, coordinate it, and get the approval from Iran, but otherwise operate on their own, kind of asking permission because they want to make sure they get permission so that they get the funding they need to spend on the weapons and to spend on the training and the troops. So that they need a positive relationship there. But it's not necessarily at Iranian direction. Sometimes Iran will direct an attack, but most of the time the actual proxies will choose their targets.
I want to ask you another question. It just popped to mind because I want to move a bit to Gaza. Wasn't planning to, but I think it's worth covering. Because I feel like a lot of the attention has moved away from Gaza, which is the most heartbreaking to me. Like, I think Iran, great debate. Did Israel make the right decision, the wrong decision? I think it's a really good debate. Hezbollah, another great debate. There's a threat to Lebanon, to Israel's border, and Hezbollah started attacking Israel first. Gaza is just a much trickier discussion, because it started off as a very logical discussion, a terrorist attack on Israel. Israel responded, but now it's been into, I think it's been about 2 years, and the amount of death and destruction is just heartbreaking, to say the least. But before talking about Gaza, I want to talk about October 7th. How could Mossad, I know there's various conspiracy theories there and I haven't dug into them, but just a very innocent general question, how could Mossad, that had all these capabilities against Hezbollah, had all these capabilities against Iran, have such a failure on their own border when it comes to Hamas? Couldn't they intercept? Now, I think I've heard you talk about this before. I think I listened to you. Yeah, you've made the comparison to 9/11 that a lot of these, the hierarchy communicating between each other. I now remember you answered that question as well, but I would love you to break it down again. Is how could they have such a failure? Because we can ask that question now, because you talked about it after Hezbollah, but now we have Iran as well, another massive success for Mossad. But that's the same Mossad that missed Hamas's October 7th attack.
So it's such an interesting question, and there's a reason that it's so rife with conspiracy theory, because people can't process how does such a capable intelligence service fail inside its own country. What people don't understand is that when Mossad is an external intelligence service, just like CIA. What that means is their primary mission set is outside of their own country of origin. Their job is to prosecute intelligence collection in every other country except Israel. Inside Israel, that belongs to the Shin Bet. The Shin Bet is the FBI equivalent of the Israeli intelligence services inside of Israel. So whenever you've got targets of interest or potential threats or terrorist activity inside Israel, that's the responsibility of Shin Bet. Now, Shin Bet and Mossad work together, because Mossad finds threats from outside that have relevance to what's happening on the inside. And of course, Shin Bet finds threats that are on the inside that have relevance to the outside. So Mossad and Shin Bet have to share and cooperate the same way FBI and CIA have to share and cooperate. But then Israel also has a third layer that doesn't exist in the United States because it has the army, right? And inside Israel, you've got compulsory military service, which means the people in the army, people in the military, aren't professional military members. They're just doing their kind of commitments within their service so that they can be a good, upstanding citizen. That doesn't mean that they are not committed. It just means that they're not as committed as a professional military service member. And the military is charged with much of the protection in areas of active hostility with any kind of, with Palestinians or with Hamas. So you've got the military and Shin Bet and Mossad, who all have to coordinate information in order to stay ahead of a threat. As if that's not complicated enough, you also have the hierarchy of careerism inside each of those three organizations. So you've got the ground troop who's motivated to do a good job, and then the middle manager who's trying to grow their career, and then the senior officer who's trying to protect their career, for all three organizations trying to cooperate and coordinate. So in hindsight, I think what we've learned since the October 7th attacks is that the threat was identified, the threat was reported up the chain inside the military. Somewhere in the middle of the military leadership, they didn't deem the report as valid. So they didn't put appropriate resourcing behind it to prevent from the attack. So then when the attack happened, everybody looks at Mossad and Shin Bet and says, you failed. And nobody's really looking at the military and saying that you made a mistake on the border. So you have all these convoluted mistakes that happened. And we have to remember, mistakes happen, right? When there's a massive success like that has psychological warfare benefits, of course, Israel's going to share it far and wide. That's why they shared the footage of them launching drones from within Iranian borders, right? Because they see the psychological and informational warfare benefit of sharing that news story. But when they find their own mistakes, they're not going to make that public. They're not going to share those details. So they squash them. And in the absence of information, people are just left wondering.
Freedom! So fresh, son. Freedom!